There is no better time to try and stop the YOLO mentality of World of Tanks console players than right now with the release of the wheeled light tank vehicles within the game. And today we're going to have a look at a couple of gameplays that showcase kind of what you can do and counteract those just disgustingly kind of overpowered tanks that just decide that they're going to YOLO you even though it's not worth it for them. How can you come out still on top, survive the battle and do well within your games? Well, we're going to have a look right now, and it involves alpha damage and having high alpha regardless of the tier that you're playing in. You could be playing at tier 7, things like the Dreadnought. You could be playing tier 6, things like the KV2. As long as you have alpha damage, you can have fun and you can punish the numpties that decide to YOLO you. And not just having alpha damage, if you have clip potential as well, you can come out on top. So let's have a look at some gameplay, showcase how you can use it and the sort of things you need to be thinking about to try and stop that YOLO mentality that for some reason everyone's deciding to do right now in those wheeled light tank vehicles like the AMD 178B right here. And let's get into it now. The first game we have to showcase to you is of course using the Object 268, and I think that this is a fantastic example of what alpha damage can do. You have the opportunity between your AP, heat and your HE rounds, the AP and heat doing 850 alpha and the HE rounds doing 1100, which is more than enough to take out a lot of tanks that you'll be meeting, especially the 90% of their hit points, especially if you hit these like wheeled vehicles, if you come up against them, if they're a couple tiers below. And that is exactly what we're after within this game. And if we can manage to come across some of these light tanks, hit them with a direct hit, whether it's with AP or HE, it's seriously going to damage them. And you'll notice that actually you don't have to be the world's best player when you're playing in a tank like this to be able to have good results. You can see what I'm doing here. We're carrying 8 HE rounds. Now, I wouldn't necessarily rely on you loading the HE rounds in the game because it can go wrong and you can end up with a little bit of disappointment when you only do like 300 damage or 400 damage to someone. But it's not that much of a loss, I guess, if you do that to someone because, yeah, you've got 850 alpha and I guess sometimes you wouldn't have penned with AP or heat. But regardless of that, what you can do with your kind of heat rounds is, as you see this IS-7 being very aggressive, just thinking he's going to be able to just YOLO our Kranvang here. It's not the case when we smack him for 900 alpha and also set him on fire, bringing our damage total up to 1266 from one singular shot in the 268, which is fantastic. And this is what the game really kind of helps from. Try and do a little YOLO shot on the M60 there, doesn't go out too well, but of course then we have the WZ-111-14 on the enemy team who's made a drastic mistake and will be punished for it because of course we have way more penetration than we need to be able to go through the front of that tank, especially when we're loading the heat ammunition, which we can do in this tank. So what does this really, how can you stop YOLO? Answer the question of today's video. Well, essentially, when you have high alpha, when someone decides that they're just going to come at you, you have the ability to just basically put your middle finger up, raise it straight to their face and say, no, I'm taking literally 50% of your hit points in one singular shot, and half the time, because they've YOLO'd you, they don't get the opportunity to take out the majority of your hit points, and so you end up trading way better than they do, and half the time the people that decide to YOLO you don't tend to be the best players in the game, so you end up actually probably coming out on top in most of the situations where they do YOLO you, unless you have low alpha, which is kind of where I feel like a lot of people, especially if they're playing a kind of an auto-loading tank, or maybe they're in like an FE 4005 where they're just in it just to get one singular shot because that's how you win games on World of Tanks, right? No, obviously. Problem is just like when they YOLO you with such high alpha, you don't really have any buffer to say, actually, no, I'm going to really punish you. I'm going to make it worth it that you actually came around that corner against me. And that's where these tanks come in really, really clutch and why I enjoy using tanks like this. And that's probably why I have a substantial amount of games in high alpha damage tanks, because When you're having a bit of a rubbish day on World of Tanks and people are just annoying you, maybe you just didn't get the right teams, or maybe you're just not playing maybe the best you could possibly do, these high alpha damage tanks allow you to really not concentrate necessarily as much. You just have to kind of position yourself in the right sort of position and get shots onto the opponents that you need to, and you can rack up damage results of 8k plus fairly, I'm not going to say easily, but they're not that hard to get if you manage to get the right matchup with the right kind of positioning and you're not being silly and just YOLOing into the opponents like we're trying to stop in today's video. You'll notice that as well, because we have the advanced reload perk within the Object 268, and I really do recommend having this perk or equipment slot if you're playing in things like the Jaegeru, the Object 268, the Object 268 version 5, any of the tier 10 TDs that have superb high alpha and reload, in that like 10 plus second reload space. That's really what I would go after and what I do if I wanted to kind of maximize the amount of damage that I'm doing, and also just avoiding the amount of shots that sometimes you might take within the game. So that's kind of what you need to be thinking about. Obviously within this game, because we're not a bot and we can actually aim, we can hit these light tanks that are going around the batch at 12T. It seems like the wheeled light tanks have kind of got to everyone's brains and they're starting to become flies and just buzzing around the map mindlessly. But luckily we do manage to actually have a brain here and just pre-aim the light tanks and the fast tanks that people can't seem to hit. I don't know if it's because people don't realise that you have to lead your shots and aim in front of tanks to be able to come out on top. I don't know. But hopefully that will get better with kind of as the game ages, with all of the influx of new players that you've been seeing on the servers. We've been having like 20,000 players at peak times now, which is the highest I've seen in a long time. For like pre-Christmas we were seeing like maybe 11,000 at peak times, maybe 12,000 at peak times, so you're seeing almost double within the game, which is really, really good. It's definitely good from a kind of content creation standpoint, because obviously people are enjoying the game a little bit more, and I guess that's really what we're after. You can see here, game's kind of gone to shit, to be honest, and you can see that the enemy team are now kind of pushing up the Object 268 on the enemy team. Obviously he has way more hit points than we do, and the only real kind of thing that you can do in this scenario is just try and go in for that last shot of damage and somehow hope that they manage to bounce. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm shoving my gun right in the face of the enemy Object 268, because that means that he may end up hitting the gun, which will result in no damage, and then we can pick him up with the final damaging hit within the game. So that's something you can do in your own games. Unfortunately it didn't work, because artillery is always fine and dandy in the game and finished us off anyway. But yeah, overall the game ends in a loss, which is a bit unfortunate. But we made a solid resistance, and I really do mean a solid resistance. There's the closed defeat. Obviously the enemy Object 279E on the team managed to pick up a high kind of damage result as well, but we picked up 7,800 damage, came second to someone that literally did like 4,500 combined, well 4,700 combined when we did 8,500. Yeah, not quite sure how Wargaming worked that one out, and we managed to get a kill as well. So yeah, I guess JetFox 1508 was just somehow better, but there we go. Hopefully that showcases the Object 268 and what you can do in a losing game. Let's take a look at when your team aren't so bad and when you can push out the damage even better when your team aren't failing. So Prokhorovka, probably a light tank's dream within console, because yeah, it's just the light tank map within the game. However, in this game, we of course are continuing to play the Object 268 because it's just one of my favourite tanks. Tank destroyers, it's really underrated within the game. The reload's superb, and that 850 really does help. And I think, showcasing tanks like this may not be something that a lot of people do. They're obviously looking at the FE 4005, which really fun, definitely will stop people YOLOing you because you have that alpha damage, and you can even use it when you're on reload to kind of stop people from coming at you because they don't know that you're on a reload, and that's where alpha damage comes in clutch. In this game we're going to use the alpha damage and DPM of the tank to stop opponents coming towards you, and also you can just block off certain sections of the map where even if someone is like a YOLO Fest light tank that you're seeing, I feel bad for those down at tier 6 and 7 because often the high alpha damage tanks don't really have that great statistics unless you're looking at the Dreadnought, which is of course a premium version of a KV2 that can go fast, has good accuracy, has way better penetration. Yeah, don't quite know what Wargaming were thinking when they released that one, but oh well, regardless of that, we've managed to set up in one of my favourite kind of starting positions on Prokhorovka, where you can decide how the battle's going and deal with it from there. You see that there is a Rheinmetall Panzerwagen on the enemy team that's kind of cresting around, doing the usual light tank tactic of cresting these ridges. We've got our trusty HE round loaded here, and I'm guessing that you can kind of presume what's going to happen in a little while, but you know, this is where having the advanced reload really helps because we're not having to sacrifice anything. It's literally just a case of, oh, there's a light tank that I can pen with HE, let me swap to that round. Doesn't take any more time, doesn't really take anything away from your attention. You're still going to be able to hit them, you're still going to be able to do damage, and in fact you'll do more damage with the HE when you're coming up against people like this. Talking about more damage, there we go, 1234, and we can reload in 10 seconds in the Object 268. This is why I love this tank, is if you are situational, if you do decide to swap the rounds, if you do load out with some HE and you know what tanks you're going to be firing at, you can punish them so bad. And unfortunately we don't manage to pen the KPZ 50T there, which is, I don't know how I didn't manage to pen. That was the side of his turret as well, but must have hit a really steep angle on that turret, which is unfortunate. But now we've got a M48 who's deciding to come up, and we bounce off of him. At this point I'm thinking, do you know what, stuff the AP rounds, they're just doing terrible. So we've loaded a couple of heat rounds here, and maybe we'll be able to pen, maybe we won't. Obviously when you're aiming at the floor, you're not going to do damage, but we rack up an insane amount of damage later on, and you can see, yeah, we'll pick on the little weaklings over at the back of the map. The general there getting taken out, 660 damage, and this is really where you can punish so bad. It's just a case of like, you become the block in the wall at some of these flanks if you do play these sort of tanks, and that's why I think don't get caught up in this whole light tank meta where you have to kind of feel like you have to YOLO in against the other light tanks, because you don't. Often players that YOLO in the light tanks end up getting taken out far too quick, and then they can't use their light tank at the end of the game to have good games. So don't go doing that. Play something like this where you have to take a little bit of, you know, knowledge of the game, make sure that, you know, you're using your tank to the best of your ability, put rounds into tracks whilst dealing damage like there, locking the opponent down, getting some assistance damage, and dealing 850 damage. What's not to like about a tank like this within the game? There's plenty of them as well. It's not like, you know, you can only play the Object 268. There's, you know, 3 versions of an Object 268. There's the FV4005, there's the FV4005 stage, or the FV215B183 Death Star. You've got things like the Jaegeru, you've got pretty much everything, you know. You've got the armoured tank destroyers that have high alpha, you've got the paper tank destroyers that have a high alpha. You've got things like the Grilla, which can move around fast and have really good accuracy, and I think that people kind of get drawn into these kind of heavy tank metas and playing these tanks that are only supposedly good. And although, yeah, I feature, you know, good tanks on the channel and say, look, these are the most competitive tanks, doesn't mean that you can't have good games in other tanks, and that's something I want to reiterate. And you can see here the Object 268, maybe not everyone's meta tank, but it can pull out results pretty much on its own. You can see it's 7-7. The game's only really just starting to warm up, and you can see here the T-44 there getting unlucky as we pen him through the side with that heat round, destroying him there. And why do you want to make sure that you're playing with high alpha? To kind of answer that anti-YOLO question, I think that what you want to do is basically get yourself into positions where you're getting crossfire things like the UDES 1516, I load a HE round because I thought maybe I can pen him, because if I fire a normal round I'm going to get spotted anyway. So I load back the normal round and just fire anyway, because we're going to get spotted regardless, because he did manage to do it. UDES 1516 somehow goes undetected here. To be honest, I make kind of a misplay, although we do get a little bit lucky and get away with it. As I should have just gone for the UDES 15 rather than hitting the Progetto again, because yeah, like the UDES 15 may be able to get multiple shots into us, and we would have been able to take him out with that last shot, so potentially could have ended the game right there for us. So yeah, a misplay by me, could have ended up losing, or at least losing the rest of my hit points, and luckily we didn't. But from this point, it's now a case of hunting down this Progetto that did decide to escape. We can pen the Progetto with HE because we've got 90mm of penetration with HE. Yeah, 90mm with HE. That's more than enough to go through a lot of the medium tanks, and certainly if you're coming up against Batchat 25Ts, if you're coming up against any of the French wheeled vehicles, you can definitely pen them with HE, and that's why I love the HE rounds on some of these. I'm not saying fire only HE, trust me, don't fire only HE, because it won't work out well. You'll end up actually messing yourself up way more than if you just fired the standard rounds. HE's just there for if you have the knowledge, if you have the ability to swap between the rounds, if you know where the weak point of an enemy tank is and you can secure the penetration with HE, why would you not want to do that within the game? But don't just fire HE thinking it does more damage. Eclipse told me it does more damage, I'm just going to load HE, because yeah, I've seen a lot of players like that and they tend to end up with a 42% win rate for some reason. Don't know whether that's because they're firing HE or because they aren't necessarily the most educated players on the game. So don't make the mistake of just firing HE, but definitely know it's there and use it as an additional feature for your kind of games within World of Tanks console. You can see here the opposite number of the high alpha TD there, the FV215B183. We managed to hit him, take him out, and since we have good kind of DPM and the reload isn't awful, we'll go for another shot and we pick him up. You know, you can sometimes do that with a tank that has kind of decent reload. If I was in the FV4005, maybe I wouldn't have gone for that shot because it was probably be a lot more risky, but we do it with this tank, and you can see we've picked up 7,854 damage. You can see us loading AP right here, but I'm about to swap to HE because if we can get any sort of hit on the VK there, and we may not pen with AP, so it's worth it. If we can get a shot, we'll probably take away the 300 to 400 of his hit points if we do manage to hit. We try and take down that building because I can't get a shot on him, regardless of whether that building's there or not. So yeah, we just try and open up an angle, and now it's just that Progetto that we saw earlier and that got quite a few hits into us actually. And whether or not we can find him within this game, but I want to take this time whilst we're searching for him, hunting him down, to really try and get you guys to think that yes, these weird vehicles are really annoying right now. Yes, they're causing an absolute nightmare to the matchmaker, where you're playing literally like down at tier 6, like 7 light tanks per team, so you're looking at literally half the game being light tanks, which is causing a massive problem. Don't forget your TDs like this. You can actually have really good fun. You can load those HE rounds, you can stop them, you can punish them, you can literally be a block wall in front of those new French wheeled light tanks. And don't forget that, as you see, even at tier 10, in a tank that is, you know, not necessarily the best, not the worst, we can still have really good games, and you can do that down at tier 6 too. Just look at tanks like the KV2, you know, look at tanks like the Dreadnought, look at all of the high alpha, even if it's like 500 alpha. You can look at the SU-100Y. That tank's actually a fun one, pretty decently accurate, much better than the KV2, and it's fun. So just have a look at these tanks, try them out, see what you think, and of course, even if you don't like the French wheeled light tanks down at the lower tiers, just play tier 10 right now, play in some of these tanks, try this kind of meta out where you can use that high alpha and just stop your opponents dead in your tracks, and hopefully that'll be good for you guys. Obviously let me know your opinions on the new French wheeled light tanks, because I don't really like how it's affecting the matchmaker. I don't like the Yolo meta that's going on right now, and hopefully that will change and battle lengths will start reaching 9 minutes down at tier 6, but it's very unfortunate for anyone that's actually grinding through the tech trees that aren't the French wheeled light tanks right now, so feel bad for you guys. Anyway, other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and a fantastic rest of your week. Don't forget to check back tomorrow where we'll be looking at another gameplay episode where we do the same sort of thing, looking at alternative metas to really counteract those French wheeled light tanks and the Yolo meta that's going on right now. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day once again, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.